Another thing, in relation to something somebody asked before, I have a poem, courtesy of Jan Flaws. Why must it be -3? When I had 3 wrong out of 20, my teacher wrote -3. But that's like crying when a few weeks of the summer holidays are over instead of rejoicing because there are so many left. Or fretting about the cupcakes with rainbow sprinkles that have been eaten instead of rejoicing, admiring the luscious ones still waiting on the plate. I think my teacher should have written +17. That's another, just a little thing, such a little thing. Don't ever take off points. Add points. You got 7 out of 10 on this one. Way to go. You didn't get the right answer. You got 7 out of 10. You did that much work right. That's correct work. Good for you. And along with that, you know, if the problem is hard enough, 7 out of 10 is awesome. If the problem is hard enough, I wish I knew enough about the history of education to find out who decided 90% was good. 90% of what? Where did that come from? I happen to be a baseball fan. I happen to be a fan of Ted Williams. He was a better batter than anyone else in the majors for the last 60 years because he was successful 40% of the time. Nobody else has been since then. 40% is as good as you can get. Nobody's that good. If kids are getting 90%, we're asking them to do trivial, stupid, silly things. So of course they're not going to be able to do complex tasks because we're not asking them to do complex tasks. Okay, I have a wonderful problem here, but unfortunately, we're not going to have the time to do it, and it's sort of the same sort of thing. I just wanted to throw this quote in from one of my heroes and idols, and a very sad thing passed away this year, Chuck Hamburg. Chuck Hamburg used to give talk after talk after talk about often the best part of the problem occurs after you solve the problem. So I think that's another way you make it happen is you keep going and you keep going and you keep going and you keep going. Okay. I have just a quick comment to make about leadership because y'all are in leadership positions, many of you are. I've been involved over my career in several projects which have turned out to be world-changing things. Every single one of them was started because someone at the ground level said, gee, we should do this. Let's do this. Let's get together and do this. This needs to be done. But they were just soldiers. So they had to go to an administrator. And the administrator approved with relish and got excited about it and cut through all the red tape and made it happen. For example, there is a North Suburban Math League with 55 teams that compete 5 times a year. 2,000 kids do hard math problems because a department chairman cut through the red tape and said, we're going to make this happen no matter what. There's a Project Excite in Evanston, which is a project that runs 3rd grade through 12th grade. Because a couple of administrators, one at Northwestern, one at Evanston, one in District 65, just shoved everybody aside and made sure that this program happened so that 3rd grade kids are doing interesting math and science. And it starts in 3rd grade, so that in the end, they end up in Chem Phys. Eleanor Kornhaber was one of my first department chairmen. And she had this habit of coming by and saying, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? What do you think about that? And you'd talk and she'd listen and she'd walk away. And then about 2 months later, there'd be a meeting and sure enough, this topic would come up and you'd hear yourself saying what you said. And if it sort of happened to be in line with what she said, She encouraged you to go with it and to run with it. But she never came in and said, this is what we're going to do. I want you to be in charge of it. She planted ideas here and there and everywhere, and she listened, and she got people talking about it, and she let it happen. Why? Because to make something work requires a passion. It has to be your idea, not something you were told to do. Many of the math teachers in my school used tablets. Why? Because they gave me one. Because they came to me and said, would you like one? And I said, oh, would I? And I started using it. And people said, what's that? I said, come on in and see. And now everybody's got one. About 2/3 of the people are using them. Nobody's telling the people that don't have them they have to use them. But people are doing all kinds of things because somebody did it. And people watched, and people listened, and people collaborated. It's very sad to me. Somebody said something about teachers not willing to share ideas. My goodness. I mean, that's what it's about. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up very quickly now. The teacher says, if you take 2 from 4, what's the difference? The kid says, see, he doesn't even care. If there is one thing, first of all, I think you've got to know the math. If you don't know the math, you really can't do any of this. You can't recognize excellence. You got to know the math. So when you're hiring people, first thing is they got to know the math. They might be real nice and friendly and joyful and enthusiastic. If they don't know the math, they're not going to make a difference in your department. They got to know the math, or at least have the ability to learn it. But given that they do, I believe that the number 2 characteristic is enthusiasm. I believe that in everything, that's the one thing that shines through. I happen to be involved in awards ceremonies and things, and virtually every recommendation for a teacher for an award says the word enthusiasm. Come tomorrow night and hear it. I'll bet you hear that word on every one of the 5 people. Vince Lombardi, football coach, said, if you aren't fired with enthusiasm, you will be fired with enthusiasm. Malcolm Forbes said, people who get carried away, never get carried away, should be. Lola May, one of our great predecessors, said, you can't be burned out unless you were once on fire. Excuse me, I don't remember what this one is. Oh, yes, John Coltrane, one of my favorite musicians, said, the main thing a musician would do is give a picture to the listener of the many wonderful things he knows of and senses in the universe. So substitute math teacher for musician, take out John Coltrane and put my name in, and we're there. There's got to be something about how great this stuff is. You know what? Because their English teacher is probably not going to tell them how wonderful and beautiful mathematics is. If you don't do it, who's gonna? And I would like to close with a series of things here. At the end of one year, I got a letter from J. Keecott Wohl, one of my former students. I had him as a freshman. I think I had him again in calculus. But our English teachers have adopted the policy of right at almost the last day of school, to have all their seniors write a letter to a teacher that made a difference in their lives. It's really a cool thing. It's really neat. Because it means that all around the school, people get these letters and open up and say, oh, gee, that's so nice. I'd like to share what Jay said. Your geometry class remains as one of the greatest classes, and you remain as one of the greatest teachers from whom I learned in 4 years. The way you taught the class is why it still sticks in my mind. You were able to convey your passion for geometry in the way you thought, and that in turn made me passionate as well. I'm not sure I know how to do that, but I know I do it. And I suspect you would do it different than I do, because it's a question of personality. But you can't hold back. You've got to say, this is so cool. Anyway, there's more. When you were loud, which is almost all the time, Things were exciting, and I paid attention. When you were quiet, I had to listen more attentively to understand. You were never a teacher who made every day seem like the next, even though I basically used the same strategy day after day after day. I specifically remember the puzzle you presented to the class at the beginning of the year. The goal was to make a three-dimensional object. It was a triangle on one surface, a square on another, a circle on another. Have you ever heard of that? Yeah. No teacher had ever given me a puzzle to do. Isn't that tragic? How could you go through 10 years in an excellent school system and nobody ever gave you a puzzle? They were probably too worried about scoring right on multiple choice tests. Anyway, it was always books and assignments to stir the mind. But the block of wood remained on your file cabinet as a calling reminder. By the way, that was not intentional until after I got this letter. It was just that I'm not organized enough to put it away. One night I'd had enough. I sat down at the dining room table and was determined to solve this thing. Eventually I had it. I went downstairs, cut a dowel rod a few times, and went to sleep that night with a different feeling in my stomach. The next morning, I walked up to you standing at the door and took the solution out of my jeans pocket. I can still hear you. Yep. That's it. That's all I said was yep. Then, without saying a word to the class, you placed your statue of La Pension. I guess that's French for the thinker. I inferred that. Everyone looked at me with wonder. And then you told them I'd solved the puzzle. The incident remains embedded in my memory. It is a testament to the fact that sometimes, in direct contradiction to traditional bookwork, the smallest thing a teacher does can have the biggest effect. Thank you.